So kind of how we're going to do this roundtable discussion tonight is we're going to go through some talking points. And the first set of talking points we're going to go to are things that we feel very solid about. And the best way to explain this is that I'm going to use the last presidential election as a tool.
That might be dangerous.
Yeah. Well, I'll explain it and everybody be like, okay, we're all the same thing. It was possible that the state of Texas could have been won by Joe Biden, but the likelihood was not, okay? So these are things that it's likely based on all the experts we've talked to, all the information we've gathered. So our first set of talking points is going to be things that we feel very confident in, and that it would be an utter shock to us if it came out that the killer, if they're eventually caught, well, not if, when they're eventually caught. That they don't fit most or all of the criteria we're about to lay out. And so what we're going to do is we're going to go through like 6, 7, 8, 9 talking points, explain them a little bit. And then at the end of that, we're going to go through, we're going to have a question and answer session where you guys can chime in, ask questions. If you want to do it, with your own voice or through the chat, that would be great. And then once we get through that talk, we're going to go towards what we call lean towards talking points. And what those are kind of like, and again, back to our presidential election map, I don't know, I'm searching for the right word here and I can't get it. Analogy, there we go. It would be like a state like, let's say, Florida. We're pretty sure which way it's leaning. Most people thought it was going to lean red last election, but there's a possibility it didn't. And those are talking points that probably in the future we're going to need more help from you guys on, if you're willing to do some work and do some digging on. And so we'll go through those talking points, and then we're going to have just some open discussion topic points where these are just we're not sure, we could be either way on some of these. And so that's how we're going to do it. And then we'll make some announcements toward the end about some of the projects and things that we're going to be working on in the future, and some things that we're not going to be working on in the future. So I'll get started with this. So going into our solid topic talking points, the things that we feel very confident, very solid about, the first thing is that Debbie knew her killer. And I think that that's pretty well expressed in every single police report we've read, every person we've interviewed, every expert we've talked to. There's almost unanimous consensus from the investigation that started on August 25th, 1975 to this very moment. Debbie knew her killer. So that means that now we need to focus on somebody who knew her and knew her very well and had some type of emotional connection to her. We're not saying that she had the same emotional connection to them, but they had an emotional connection to her. The second thing that we can say virtually and definitively to almost exactly that is that the killer knew the property and knew the house. It is very hard to navigate in that yard. It's very hard to navigate in the carport, by the back step, and the killer likely went into the house. We're pretty confident of that too. That's not a solid talking point, but the person knew the house. So now we've got someone that she knew, someone who had an emotional attachment to her, and somebody who knew the property and the house, the carport, knew how the functional operation of the yard, basically, how the gate worked in the back, where people park. They knew all of this stuff. I think that's pretty obvious and evident. The third thing that we can say definitively is that the killer brought the weapon. And I know everybody's thinking to themselves right now, well, that seems kind of obvious. They didn't find the weapon at the crime scene, and they tested everything in the house. Well, actually, that's not obvious to us. It took us a long time going through the proper motions of investigating that aspect of the case before we could come to that conclusion. But I think now at this point, we can definitively say that the killer brought the weapon. And Jennifer, you and I have discussed this extensively. We believe now in a solid talking point that the perpetrator was male. Explain that.
Yeah, there's a lot of indicators that point in that direction. And the first one, actually, it took us months to really figure this out and talk to some of the forensic experts about Debbie's injuries. But it does appear that she was overcome pretty quickly. Initially, we thought that she was able to fight back for maybe a few minutes. And the more we dissected and got information about her injuries and information from Jeff, the knife expert, we realized she didn't have the traditional defensive wounds that a stab victim would have if they had the ability to really fight back. It appears that she was taken down on her front side, on her stomach side, and that the majority of the attack was from behind her. And that's evidenced because there's way more injuries to her back than there are to her front. And that's not to say she didn't put up any fight, because I'm confident that she did. But I just think one of those stab wounds, one of the more serious ones, was probably delivered in the beginning of the 17. And unfortunately, it just rendered her unable to yell, very difficult to breathe with 2 collapsed lungs. And then her heart was struggling because her heart was sliced as well. And so being able to control a victim in that manner just lends to someone who outweighs her, someone who's bigger than her, someone who's stronger than her. Debbie was a lean woman, but she was not tiny. She was about 5'7", and she was fairly athletic. So I think any other females in her lives that may have perpetrated or could be considered a person of interest, I guess I should say, physically, they don't match up to Debbie. And I just think Debbie could have, at a minimum, put up a better fight, if not actually injured the perpetrator if it was a female, or even gotten away. And again, the location of the wounds, primarily to her backside, indicate someone being able to have the ability to pin her down to her front. So that just, it points us in the direction of a male. The fifth thing, which I basically just said, but number 5 on our list of things that we pretty much know as fact, is that Debbie was on her stomach for the majority of the attack. And if we dissect the attack backwards, that probably means her attacker first ambushed her from her backside, and in some form or fashion was able to get her down on the ground on her stomach and hold her there. Number 6, I am confident that the killer left forensic evidence of themselves at the scene. Now, everybody knows that DNA technology and all that wasn't even around in 1975. So just because they didn't detect forensic evidence at the time does not mean it was not left. And I guarantee, for the amount of time and interaction this killer had with Debbie, they left traces of themselves on her at the crime scene, possibly inside of the house, maybe even in the alley or wherever they parked their vehicle. There's actually several different sections to this crime scene, and every second that a killer spends in any portion of a crime scene, they are running the risk of leaving trace evidence or forensic evidence of themselves. I mean, I have a lot of hair, not everybody does, but like, I shed hair all day long. My husband drives him crazy. Even eyebrows, eyelashes, arm hairs, those can hold forensic value with today's technology. And we're always shedding those. Skin cells, everything you touch now and back then, you're shedding touch DNA, you're shedding your skin cells. The killer may have got cut themselves. She may have scratched the killer. They may have incurred some sort of injury that bled. There's a wealth of different options, if you will, of different types of forensic evidence that this killer left at the scene. And I guarantee that they left some. It's a matter of, did police find it back in the day, and is the evidence or that DNA robust enough to stand up and be detected with new technology today? And that's hopefully an answer we can bring you in the near future once Lubbock PD gets their DNA results back. So point being, this killer left prints and forensic evidence at the scene. We also believe that the killer had to know that Doug was not at home, because anybody just walking by this home that's unfamiliar with the residents would not know that there was a single woman in the house that night. There's just no way to tell that. And just because there's only one car in the carport, a stranger wouldn't know how many people live in the house, how many cars they own, and so on and so forth. So most likely this killer had the inside knowledge that Debbie was at the property alone and that Doug was at work. Following that, it's very likely, whether it was a conscious or subconscious knowledge, this killer knew that Doug was the most likely person to come home and find Debbie dead. And then finally, we know that there were elements, this is our 9th point. We know that there was elements of both staging and posing at this crime scene, which is actually kind of unusual to have one or the other, but really unusual to have both. But the staging most likely was the attempt to break the kitchen window with the garden hoe to make it look like some sort of burglary gone wrong. And Debbie's body itself was posed. That may have also been an attempt at staging and trying to convey that a sexual assault had happened, and maybe that was the motive, but we know that that did not occur. So we know that's not the motive. So George, those are the 9 points that we came up with today, but if you guys think we missed something, let us know, we'll add it to the list, and then let's open it up for a few minutes to discussion on any of those 9 points or others that you want to bring up and see what everybody thinks. We'll see how this works. If you want to speak, just unmute yourself and go ahead. If it gets to the point where we have too many people like talking over each other, there is a way to raise your hand.
Yeah, let's just do that.
Okay.
Nancy's already raised her
I
hand.
see Nancy.
Yeah, let's go with Nancy first.
Okay.
I have tried to follow all of this. And what you just said just a little bit ago kind of hit me, that you think the whole initial attack or most of it was from behind. Could you kind of tie that into that person was at the door in the house where they went, how they got her because of the way she ended up in the end?
Jennifer, I'll take the front end of that because I know I'll miss something and you'll clean it up. So we'll just do it in that order. I think what happened is the most likely 2 scenarios are that someone knocked on the door, she confronted them and was walking out the door to her car with her stuff, and then the person attacked her from behind. The second scenario is that she was leaving at a certain time, she comes out the door and the person ambushes her. They were in hiding somewhere. My inclination is to think that she confronted the person, and the reason for that is the door's open, and we're going to talk about this later. There's really no bloody prints or blood on the door, so it's almost as if the door may have been open the entire attack. So she's coming out, she's got her stuff, she's like, I'm leaving. It could be, and we all know the list of suspects, so we know that. Jennifer, do you have anything to add to that?
That's pretty much what I was going to say, is go over those 2 most likely scenarios. I mean, we know that the actual attack occurred in the carport. That's probably where she expired.
Well, follow up, I guess I may have missed it. Where was her head in relationship to her car, in relationship to the house, the front and back door?
Oh, gotcha. So she was laying in an east-west direction between her car and the south side of her home, and her head was towards the street. Does that make sense? Which is west, and her feet were facing towards the back door that she came out of, which is east. And it appears that she was dragged and left basically in that same east-west direction.
Yeah. Next question. Anybody at all? Tracy.
Tracy, go ahead.
Hi, can you guys hear me? My internet's really bad.
No, great.
What arm did she carry her purse on? I'm wondering if that stabbing under her left armpit, she's got her purse here and she's grabbed, and as she tries to grab back, that knife goes in that way.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point.
And my second is just a comment, is from my experience in working with my patients, when an attack occurs, there's a fight, flight, or freeze, and sometimes that freeze can prevent the fighting back.
Yeah.
And this, this for her probably came totally by surprise, and I had no doubt she probably just kind of froze, which lessened the fight back.
Yep. George and I have discussed that because I haven't been attacked like this, but I've obviously been to a couple of combat zones, and you get in situations that are unexpected, that are extremely startling. And one for me was I was in a rollover, and I can still remember as we were rolling in the vehicle, my voice was frozen.
Yeah.
It's hard to explain. Like I couldn't scream.
Mhm.
And a lot of people have asked us, like, why didn't anybody hear Debbie screaming? And that may very well be why, because she was so startled and her brain is trying to process very quickly what's actually going on, because it's going to take you a couple of seconds to realize you're under attack. She just may not, her body may have just been putting that energy towards other things.
Well, the whole neurobiology was happening there,
Mhm.
and that trauma response probably just took over. And for some people like you lose your voice.
Yeah.
Sometimes the whole body freezes. It can even go into a tonic immobility, where they are just stiff, or a collapsible immobility, which is almost like a faint. So when I hear things that, well, she didn't have any fight wounds, she didn't scream, I'm like, she was savagely attacked. She probably had a trauma response that fought against her fighting back.
Yeah, Tracy, and one theory that we've had is that maybe the initial like thrust or blow that was delivered to her body may have come from somebody who was right-handed, knife in hand, ice pick motion. They come over the top of her head, and they may have very all but sliced her ear off. And just the shock, because I mean, if your ear got sliced off, you would immediately know that it's gone. And just the shock, your senses are all out of whack. And just that little bit of shock may have been just enough time for that killer to plunge what would have been a deadly blow to her back into her lungs or something like that. So we've thought about that too.
Yeah, there's a lot of chemicals and hormones doing their dance when you experience a trauma like that. So I'm not surprised that she didn't scream or that she didn't fight back.
I mean, there's another, it's an embarrassing example of why I told this to George too. One time I was walking from a gas pump inside a pay, and I don't even know what I tripped over. And all of a sudden, in a half second, I was on my face in the parking lot of this gas station, and I was stunned because it was so unexpected. You know, and it almost like knocked the wind out of me. It might have. And so that could have happened too. Like as she went down, if she hit the pavement really, really hard, not only being startled and caught off guard, but then she could have lost her wind as well.
Yeah.
I mean, she could have even hit her head on the concrete and been
stunned,
knocked out or something, you know. So I think that's, yeah, you bring up some excellent points.
I also saw in the file where it talked about other homicides that were similar. And I'm curious if there were any other near fatal or near robbery attempts or near sexual assault attempts involving a knife.
There were some that we've been able to come across. We can't make any definitive connection though between those attacks and Debbie's case. It's kind of one of those things, unless we find, in a case so old, you really have to just stick onto you have to stick on the lines of something that can prove tangible. If it was 2 days after the attack, obviously you just spread a huge wide net and try to chase down everything. But even with the case file that we've had access to in this case, it's very incomplete itself, number one. And then number two, a lot of these other attacks, I mean, we've got the case file on one other woman that was stabbed to death in Lubbock. And I'll tell you this, there is a loose connection to that one. And there are some similarities to it. I mean, we're going to vet it out. But for the most part, there's just not, I mean, there's not enough for us to go on right now.
Okay. And just one last question, and I'll stop hogging all the time. Was there anything odd going on around the house a few days before? Like you go home and you're like, well, I didn't leave that there, or I didn't leave the gate open. Did the family notice anything out of place days before the attack?
Not that's been reported. And of course, we've asked Doug, like, can he remember anything like that in the days prior? And police essentially asked the same question. But I mean, he said when he and Debbie got home the night before, Saturday night, I think, which was after he got off work, you know, the back porch light was on, back door was locked, everything completely normal on the property as far as he was concerned. So there's no report of anything strange on the property or in that immediate vicinity.
And Jen, I'll add to that. I don't think Doug even realized where the garden hoe, I didn't say backhoe this time.
Right.
I think it was actually his dad that had to tell the police that his dad had, I think his name is George, but he went by Raymond.
Mhm.
that he actually was in the flower garden, I don't know, the week before, working in the flower garden himself at the house. So that just shows you the level of, not that Doug's unaware, but obviously if something is weird going on around your house, you're more aware, I guess is the best way to put it. So
Yeah.
any other questions on
Yeah.
these topics? Okay, moving on. Jen, I'll take the first and fourth, just because I talk about those more, and I'll let you take 2 and 3, and then if I accidentally get into 5, I'll apologize.
Oh, don't worry about it.
Okay, I know you don't. Now these are what we call lean topics, meaning that we're leaning in one direction, but we don't have enough. There's not enough concrete evidence that that these things applied to the killer or the timeline. But what we wanted to do, and these are probably more discussion topics, so we'll go through, and there's only 5 of these, so it'll be a little quicker. These are probably more up to debate, more to talk about. And literally, I can tell you today, Jennifer and I had a conversation, and we literally thought of 2 things that we had never thought of before after all this time, all the research, everything else. And so it was kind of mind blowing. So that's why we really want to do this with you guys, because you never know when somebody's going to say something that might just change the whole dynamic. So the first thing that we think the killer knew, but we don't know definitively, is that the killer knew Debbie's timeline for the night, the schedule that she was on, meaning that she had come home and at some point she was going to return to the Pizza Inn to put the $140 back in the register and help Doug with the inventory. And so the reason that is it possible that the killer just happened upon her in the same window of time that she was going to leave and return to the Pizza Inn? It's possible. Is it probable? Absolutely not. Because we're not talking about a wide berth of time. Doug talked to her, and we estimate anywhere from 8:45 to about 9 o'clock that night. He calls her at 10 and she doesn't answer. So from 8:45 to 10, that's the window she's leaving in. And she had told him in that conversation that she was watching a movie, and that as soon as she got done watching it, she was going to leave. Well, we know that the movie that was playing at that time was The Odd Couple, starring Jack Lemmon and Walter Matthau. Okay. And we know that that movie ended at 9:30, but as you guys will remember back in those days, the movie would end at about 9:20, and then they would do a commercial break, and then they would come back and tell you what the featured movie was going to be the next week. I'm sure everybody here remembers all that. So she could have left as early as 9:20. Now she has her purse, all the stuff. You guys know all the facts. She has all of her stuff with her. She's walking out the door. So did some not arbitrary, but did someone that she knew come up on her at that point? It's highly unlikely. It is possible, but very unlikely.
Yeah. And the second thing that we're leaning towards, which I really already basically discussed, so won't say it all again, but we're leaning towards the fact that she did not have much of an opportunity to put up a fight once this got underway. Something that I'm leaning towards from a forensic standpoint is that I believe once Debbie was subdued and her body lay in the carport, that her body lay there for at least a couple minutes before it was moved. And so that leads us to the big question of what was the killer doing in those, at a minimum, couple of minutes. And so what I say from a forensic standpoint is that the blood pool in the carport is significantly bigger and more widespread than the one by the back step. So it would appear that most of her bleeding out happened in the carport before she was moved. I think if she was moved immediately, the opposite would be true, and you'd have a larger blood stain by that back step than you would have had in the carport. So again, this is just something we're leaning towards, and we can't state it as fact, but this is something me and George were debating this afternoon, is what is the person doing in these couple of minutes while she's laying there? Are they panicking? Are they cleaning themselves up? Did they start to leave the property and then come back for some reason? I mean, there's a wide range of scenarios of things that this person could have been doing in those minutes. And I'm saying 2 minutes, and I'm going to say that's my minimum. I mean, this could have been a 10-minute window where she laid there before being moved. But I think based on the blood pools, it was at least 2. So that is something we would love to debate. We can do some of that tonight, but also maybe in the Facebook group, we can discuss, try to figure out what was going on then.
Yeah, and one thing that, and you, several of you guys have noticed this when you've seen pictures from the time frame of when the murder occurred. We've heard several people say, hey, there's no footprints in the blood that was strewn from where the attack happened to where her body ended up. And that perplexed us too, because the pictures are, well, Jennifer and I've talked about, the pictures are bad. Number one, you can't rely on those pictures necessarily. But 2, it is something we talked about in that path. There doesn't seem to be, if the killer's stepping in it, there doesn't seem to be any footprints. Well, we have a theory that maybe Debbie was killed next to the car in the carport. Then the killer walked through the open door and went inside and cleaned themselves up, and then came back out and dragged her body up to the back step afterwards, because that would explain why there's maybe a lack of evidence there, or maybe it covered up, like, the killer may have stepped, but then the blood strewn comes across and it completely covers up any of those potential footprints. So we think that and here's the thing. If the killer did not clean themselves up at the house, there's only a couple of scenarios. They got in their car drenched in blood or had a lot of blood on them and they drove off. That they cleaned themselves up in the yard. We have no contemporaneous report of that. So, and we actually feel pretty solid about that because, you guys remember Philip, the journalist that came on and talked. He had a lot of conversations with Bob Lemons, and we feel confident that going through some of the stuff that Bob and Philip discussed, if they had found any evidence in the yard that the cleanup had happened out there, let's say the killer had gone up to what was the term, a spigot back in the day?
Yeah.
If they'd used that or cleaned themselves off on the grass, we would know that. We're pretty confident of that. So there's no evidence of that. So there's only one other option. And Jen, what's that option?
Well, they either cleaned themselves up or they brought a change of clothes. I tend to think that the person must have had at least a shirt or something in their car, because like George alluded to, if you walk away from the scene without cleaning yourself at all, now guaranteed you're gonna have a lot of blood transfer in your car, and that's way harder to clean up. And you've got bloody clothing, but also like the person had to go somewhere that night. They either went home or they did something and they saw somebody. I mean, it's inevitable. I mean, unless they lived completely by themselves. But that is not the case with nearly everybody who's been on the list of persons of interest. So they had to know that, oh my gosh, I'm gonna have to go home tonight and my parents live there or something. I can't go home covered in blood. So I'm leaning towards now thinking they at least had another shirt in the car, because that is not something that you're gonna be able to clean up at the scene. And if you show up at your house naked, that's probably going to be noticed by somebody. So
Maybe.
I mean, so anyways, that's just another thing that came to mind recently for us, is that most likely they must have had some kind of change of a shirt at a minimum in the car, and maybe a full outfit, who knows.
And Jen, I'll add to what you're saying. I think and I'm just going through my head, every person of interest that we know of that they interviewed had contact with other human beings that night.
Yeah.
So if they showed up naked or they showed up disheveled, or obviously if they were covered in blood, that would have came out. And obviously that didn't happen.
Yeah.
So if anybody noticed any blood in a car, blood is really hard to clean up. Everybody here knows how hard blood is to clean up. So I guess we'll cut it off right there. And I did kind of dive into one of our other talking points for later, but we'll go ahead and open this segment up to questions. You guys have any questions, comments, theories about what we just talked to? And I'm going to say, is it Yvonne?
Yvonne.
Yeah. Yeah. What if he was changing his clothes and then taking the clothes in the purse? Wasn't there a field across?
Empty
Yes.
lot. I don't know if it was a field, but it was an empty lot.
Do you know if they searched that for like the
Mhm.
purse or clothes? Oh, they did.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
Well, my theory is that the killer probably just took the clothes and dumped them into like an industrial dumpster, like behind a gas station or
Oh.
something like that. Because that's a real common way for criminals to get rid of evidence, because no one goes in there. The big trash truck comes, picks it up, it goes out to the landfill, you never see it again.
Yeah. I mean, no doubt this person had some bloody articles of clothing that they had to dispose of somewhere. And obviously they were successful in doing that, but it just adds another element of risk to this type of crime.
He just seemed to stay a long time. I
Yeah.
mean, 2 minutes. 2 minutes would be a long time
Yeah,
sitting there, and 10 would be almost like an hour in everybody else's life.
for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
And that again goes to the familiarity with the property, knowing the time frame of the night for all the participants, Doug, Debbie, everybody, and also just the comfort level. You know, you'd have to feel comfortable in that space. I mean, you know, I go into my friends' houses all the time, and you know, I'm not as comfortable in their houses as I'm in mine, but I'm definitely more comfortable in their houses than when I go to some stranger's house. So, but yeah.
Plus, going back to, we think the killer had the knowledge that Doug was at work and probably knew Doug's schedule. So I'm sure that helped them feel safer in staying on scene for a few minutes, because they knew the risk. They knew that Doug was the only other resident of the house on a Sunday night at 9:30, 10 p.m. No one else is coming by the house, most likely. And on Sunday night back then, most people are in bed. I mean, even most of the neighbors that were canvassed said I'd already gone to bed by 9 or so. So again, whether that was conscious or subconscious, they probably knew in the back of their mind they were fairly safe taking that extra time at the scene.
I mean, his person, that would say something a lot about his personality. To feel
Yeah.
that comfortable to take that long. I mean, he had to have nerves of steel to,
Well,
just
and
like a real sociopathic kind of.
so to be probably standing there when she's expiring, which is not a pretty sight, and listening to it, and she's face up, that didn't bother him, and he left her that way, which indicates no remorse. So yeah, there's, I mean, I'm not a psychologist or anything, but there's got to be some sort of like attachment disorder or something going on to where that none of that bothered him, because for most of us, we wouldn't be able to handle that as a human.
Yeah. I don't know how to raise my hand, but call on me when I'm ready.
Okay, go ahead.
Let's go for it.
Okay. Okay. I got this new thing and I keep like putting my hand over the camera. I don't know how to raise my hand. Okay. So one of the, I guess it's just a talking point, is when, you know, during that span of time that she's laying in the carport, you know, for the, you know, whatever, 2 minutes or longer, I think more likely he was just panicking, like in anger, like, what is he going to do now? You know, so I think it was more of, you know, I can't believe you made me do this, you know, all of that kind of stuff. What am I going to do? In his head, he's angry, he's mad. And then he has to come up with a plan, you know, how am I going to make this look not what it is? So I think all of that time he spent, he knew he had the time and he was just enraged still. So I think it was maybe why you see more of the blood in the carport, is because he kind of walked away thinking, I'm going to leave her. And then he's like, crap, you know, and just anger, and kept walking back. And, you know, who kind of, you know, knows at that point. But I think he was trying to figure out another plan for how he wanted her found in essence. So.
Yeah, I can totally picture that, like him being in the dark backyard where he's basically safe, but he's just like so beyond agitated, and then panicking, and probably like, oh my gosh, can't believe I just did that. Now what?
Still in rage,
Yeah.
you know, like how long until he came down? Because he's still pretty rageful, you know, and I think that's kind of where the hoe comes in, or yes, the hoe, where he smashes the window as he's just enraged also. Who knows, you know, after he moves her, kind of just breaks the window just because I can't believe you made me do this kind of thing.
Sure.
But anyways, okay, I'm going to try to mute myself again. So here we go.
By the way, everybody, something I forgot, but it just crossed my mind. The killer had to put the knife down at some point in order to move her body and undress her. I would love to know where they set that knife down and how they retrieved it, because it was so dark. Just something to think about. I don't have an answer.
That is a good, okay.
Yeah.
Good
So
enough.
think about that one. And
All right, I got it.
by the way, everybody, we'll go through the chat questions towards the end. I see there are questions in the chat. I promise we'll get to them.
Yeah, I was gonna suggest maybe we churn through 2 or 3 of them right now to try to get them down. Yeah.
That's fine.
I'll grab Anna asked, will the hair found on her hand be tested for DNA? We're hopeful. That's all we can say. You know, the Lubbock PD has promised that they're going to try to get some, you know, forensic testing done. And we don't know exactly what all that entails specifically, but they said they're going to do the best they can do. And so we're just hopeful at this point. We may have some news on that very shortly, or it may be a while.
Yeah.
Then LaDonna said, wasn't there something about a threatening phone call in the weeks prior? Yeah, there was a lot of speculation about threatening phone calls from some of the family members. Again, Jen, you can speak to this better than I.
I don't know.
I mean, there's, you know, it's so ambiguous because like we talked to Doug and Doug is not aware of any threatening phone calls. We talked to, you know, the 8-year-old sister who was 8 at the time, and she tells us there were several. And then we go through the reports and there's some smattering of it. But again, I think some of you guys might remember back, I mean, back to the 70s, 80s, even into the 90s, prank phone calls, people would call and, you know, say something terrible and then hang up on you. I mean, I'm not going to lie. I know I did some stupid stuff like that myself. It's mostly my friend's fault. It wasn't me, but no, it was me. But you know, we did stupid stuff like that, not realizing that we probably were freaking out, you know, the person on the other line. And so it's hard to validate any of those claims without any record or proof of it, you know, I mean, and it's also hard for me to believe if there was some legitimate threat made to Debbie back then, that there weren't more precautions being taken. She was at home by herself. She obviously went to her parents' house almost every day, it seems like. So why didn't she just go home with them and then go back to Pizza Inn from their house, you know? So I don't know. I don't
Plus,
put
if
a lot of credence into it. But
someone's threatening her in the weeks prior, then this crime itself would have been better planned. And there's a little planning that went into this, but not a lot, not weeks worth by any means. So, but yeah, the main thing that, like what George said, is like we have zero documentation with any details about any of these calls. So, I mean, we keep them in the back of our mind, but there's nothing that we have that we can link them to this crime.
yeah, and I think people need to remember, Jennifer, that premeditation, it can be minutes,
Yeah.
it can be hours, it can be days, it can be months, it can be years.
Yeah. Yeah.
So premeditation, you know, 2 minutes before, if I decide I'm going to do something 2 minutes before I do it, that's premeditation. So, Anna had another question. Why was she afraid of being raped? Did someone frighten her? Jen, again, I mean, I guess same answer. It's 1975. Ted Bundy's running around killing and raping girls. They're trying to catch him in all these different states. It was just kind of the 1970s. The crime rate was big, you know. I mean, there's a lot of women on here. I mean, how many of you guys walk outside at nighttime when it's dark and there's just a little tinge of fear, you know, that there's something out there?
Yeah.
And so that's, I mean, her being afraid of being raped was probably akin to maybe a lot of young, you know, women, you know, living in Lubbock, Texas in 1975. There were probably lots of women who were scared of that.
Yeah. Anna also asked, have all the neighbors been ruled out? They could have washed up at their outdoor spigot, meaning at their own house, which is totally true. The neighbors were canvassed pretty well. Whether any of them were looked at as suspects, I don't have that information. So it's hard to tell who police ruled in or out in terms of that. I do think the neighbors have to be considered, because a neighbor, especially like behind Debbie and Doug's house across that little alleyway, could have a view of their backyard from their own backyard, might know the comings and goings of Debbie and Doug, and have some of that intimate information that this killer must have had. most of the neighbors were significantly, well, a generation at least older than Debbie and Doug. That doesn't mean they can't be a killer. That's part of the reason through the previous Crime HQ effort that we were trying to finish that, not finish, but like expand the list of neighbors and all of their children, which you guys helped immensely on, to see, if any of their children were maybe a younger age, closer to Debbie, that could possibly be a person of interest that had a crush on her or something like that. But I mean, talking to Doug again, it doesn't seem like they hung out with their neighbors. I'm sure they waved to each other and they were friendly, but it doesn't sound like, I mean, I feel like Doug would have known if there was a neighbor that kept bothering Debbie. And as we stated earlier, we're confident she knew her killer. So if there's a neighbor that's bothering her, trying to hit on her or whatnot, I expect she would have at least told Doug, if not her parents. But again, we cannot rule out the neighbors at this point. In fact, I mean, from our point of view, no one's ruled out. So until an arrest is made and there's a conviction, no one is innocent and nobody is cleared. So
Right.
that's not a great answer to that question, but that's all the information I can give on it.
Jen, Kim asked, she said, I've never heard any detail of the interview with Paul's date that night. Is there anything about that that can be shared? I can tell you this, we've interviewed her extensively. We've talked to her. The contents of that conversation, we will release that at some point in a form, because we're not going to keep everything under wraps, obviously. She told us some interesting things, that's all we can say about that right now. And to be totally honest with you, I'm not sure how much Jennifer, have we released anything on that at this point?
All
Okay.
I said is that her current statement pretty much matches up with what she told police back in the day. So her memory has remained consistent, but beyond that, that's something that's between us and the detective right now.
Yeah, and we'll get it out at some point. We're not trying to hold back on everybody because we know you want to know that, but we'll get it out there, and you will find it very interesting. I can tell you that. Let's see. And this is a statement by LaDonna. Unless the person had just gotten out of the shower and was naked when he followed her out, killed her, no bloody clothes. And Anna says, good point. And we've talked about this a bunch. I mean, it clears up a lot of, we're not saying this is how it happened, but it's a good possibility that matches some of the forensic and explains some of the loose ends and things that can't be tied. So that is a very good point. And then Tracy, to everyone, what did Paul's parents say about that night? When did Paul come home? Did he shower at his home that evening? All we can say about that is that Paul, his parents were not home that night from contemporaneous reports. And he came home, he said he came home, took a shower, and then he went on his date with Tina. The only thing that alibied him there was that he said that his mother remarked to him that she noticed some wet towels, and so he must have come home and taken a shower. His parents did not say that to police, to our knowledge. It was him that said it, him saying, my mom said. So that's all we've got right now as far as an alibi for that. And I don't know how public that's been, but it's public now. So, that's what we know.
If his parents were interviewed, we don't have that information.
Or any of his siblings who lived in the home.
Yeah.
We don't know. Jen, you want to take the next couple?
Yeah, do we know if Debbie was pregnant? Nope. She was on birth control, and on top of that, there's obviously they checked for that at autopsy, and that was a negative result. So no, she was not pregnant. That's a good idea, Sharon. He could have put the knife in his mouth as he was moving.
Yeah.
A good thought, because I hadn't thought of that.
That was a very good thought.
Author will fundraise if money is needed for DNA testing. So this first round of DNA testing, Lubbock PD did put in for a grant from a nonprofit organization, and they were awarded that grant to pay for this first round of DNA testing. So that funding was established, and obviously they got to wait and see what results they get and see, do they need to submit more evidence for testing? that will depend on whatever results they get back from what's already been submitted. But yeah, I know Authorum, I follow them on Twitter and everything. They're amazing. And we do have some links to their organization if we need it. So definitely a great outfit. Do we know the exact time or year when that phone call was recorded with the reporter? Oh, when Philip was talking
Yeah.
to Bob.
I think that's 1984, because that's when the whole,
45, yeah.
yeah, 84, 85ish. That's when the Henry Lee Lucas stuff started percolating. So, yeah. But I mean, I think you guys know this. Philip moved in with him, you know, so he was around them, and they were going to write a book together. And so he had a lot of conversations, and then none of those conversations was anything brought up about blood being found out in the yard. Which again, you think to yourself, oh, there's a spigot, I'm washing this blood off, it's easy to get rid of. That's not true at all. It would be very hard, especially in the dark, to conceal cleaning yourself off outside. It would be a lot harder than a lot of people would think.
I mean, in one of the newspaper photos, at least two, I think it's two of the detectives are standing right by the garden, the little garden area that was outside Debbie and Doug's back door. I mean, I have to imagine, and that was taken the next day during the daylight. I imagine they combed through that yard looking for, you know, any blood evidence. And we still don't, this is something we need to figure out, but we don't know for sure where the water faucet was in the backyard. I think it makes total sense. It would be by the flower bed. And that's right where these two guys are standing. So I would think that that would stick out to them and they'd notice.
Absolutely. Do we have any other questions before we move on to our next topic range? Okay, very good. Jen, I'll take the tire.
George, you have Amber actually has a question.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry, Amber.
Oh, you have your hand raised. Apologize. Amber, if you unmute yourself, you can ask what you'd like to ask.
Hey, thanks.
There you go.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, so a few things about the timeline for Paul. And there were a couple of questions that were asked about Tina's interview, which I know we're keeping held closely to the chest. But some things that I was taking notes throughout the podcasts and throughout this, the sessions. And some things that I noticed were that Paul had specifically asked to get off early that night because of his date with Tina, and that I believe it said that in Diamond State Murder Board that his time card was punched out at 8:43, and that he had mentioned possibly taking a shower over at Debbie's, but he says he didn't. And then Tina said that he arrived at her house freshly showered at 10 o'clock. So I was wondering if Paul ever said where he showered at, or if Paul ever confirmed. I know we said what he said his parents said, but did Paul ever himself confirmed where he took a shower, or if he did at all?
He said that he took a shower at his parents' house. And the whole reasoning for him wanting to take a shower at Debbie and Doug's is because it was closer to Tina's house and it would save him time. But we've come to the realization it would have saved him, you know, maybe 4 to 5 minutes of travel time potentially. So we don't know. And it's a mystery.
George, let me clarify that. So based on this paperwork, the documentation we have, they didn't actually ask Paul why he wanted to shower at Debbie and Doug's. Yeah. What happened was police asked Doug, why do you think Paul wanted to shower at your house? And he said, and I'm paraphrasing, the only reason I can think of is because my house is closer to Tina's. So we don't actually know what Paul's reasoning was for asking that favor.
Okay.
Yeah, and thank you so much for clarifying that, Jennifer, because that is a dramatic clarification.
Yeah.
Okay.
So just to clarify, Doug is just, what's the word, George?
It is the weirdest thing. I mean, I've covered a lot of murder cases. You guys know that, and Jennifer's been involved in a bunch, and we've asked everybody we could possibly ask we're still waiting for someone to say that it was not weird for someone to ask to take a shower at their ex's house after they've gotten married, ask their husband when they're not going to be there. It's
Very
just,
odd.
yeah, I mean, and listen, we're not accusing anybody of anything at all. We're
No.
just telling you exactly what we have found in the case file and what people have told us.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Sure.
Welcome. Great question.
George, you kind of went over the shoe prints. Was there any?
Yeah, I was thinking maybe because I think you want to do the not saying the name.
Yeah.
You want to do that one. So why don't I just take the tire track and then you can take that.
Touch on the tire print and then we'll give them the update on.
Yeah.
our
So as far as the tire print goes, it's not really a lean topic or a solid topic for us. Jennifer and I both tend to believe that it's probable that this tire print is related to the killer. Now, there's a couple of things about it, and there's a couple reasons why we believe that. Number one, the tire print was relatively small if you compare it to a trash truck, meaning it was not a trash truck print. Number two, the alleyway was not utilized, and Doug has told us this and other people have said, the alleyways were not utilized as thoroughfares. People were not driving up and down these alleys all the time. And I was telling Jennifer today, one of the unique things about Lubbock, Texas, especially in 1975, and a lot of you guys who are from Lubbock or know Lubbock, is that Lubbock is basically at one time was just a square as far as traveling. All the roads, all of the, the numbered roads lined up in a complete row, and then all the named roads lined up in a complete row. So there wasn't, a lot of times when people use alleyways, they're trying to create a shortcut to get somewhere. Well, Lubbock was so, square, it was just like a square. So there's no need to cut through alleys. And everyone we've talked to said that didn't happen anyway. And there weren't very many houses out there to begin with. And it's on the edge of town. So you take all those factors into account, there's just not any reason to think that this some random track. And I'll add this, I believe I'm right about this, Jennifer, didn't it rain like a day or two before that, like pretty heavily rain? So like if there had been a tire tracks, they might have been washed away.
I don't honestly know that information. I have to look up the weather pattern for that week. I just know the day of that there was no rain.
Yeah. And also, another aspect of it, if you park that, okay, this is what we know. There were no cars reported in front of their house. Okay. Now that could mean two things. No one passed by and noticed the car, or the car wasn't there. Those are the only two options. Now we know the killer had to have had a vehicle. So perhaps the killer backs into the alley, and Jennifer and I, we've been in that alley recently. It's dark to this day. I mean, if it was backed far enough into the alley, it's likely that somebody would not have even noticed it had they driven by. So that's why we think that the tire track could have some connection to this case. And now, Jen, in recent weeks, we keep we just keep trucking along. We keep calling people. We keep knocking on, like virtual doors right now. But we have a little bit of an update on some stuff we've been working on.
So our spreadsheet, so George and I keep a shared spreadsheet that lists all the people that we want to talk to. And then sometimes names get put on there because they've reached out to us and they had a link to the case, and we like to keep track of who we've spoken with and the date we spoke with them, and then what's their contact information in case we need to get back in touch. And I'm not going to name names, let me give you the stats first. Our spreadsheet has almost 60 people on it, and we've gotten in touch with at least 75% of those people. So 48, 47, 48, 49 people, something like that, have talked to us, no problem. Obviously, the people we wanted to talk to the most are those most closely connected to Debbie and Doug. Everybody knows we've talked to Paul, we've talked to Tina. Everybody knows Lex refuses. He blocked me immediately, and that's fine. But there's been a couple other people out of their circle of friends that have taken us some time to get in contact with. And again, I'm not going to name names, but there's now a third person in their circle of friends who is actively avoiding us, either avoiding us and or flat out lying to us. And that's about all I can say about it right now. But what that indicates is now we've got 3 people who knew Debbie and Doug pretty well, who are engaging in similar behaviors and trying to be elusive, which indicates to me one of them, if not all 3, know something. I'm not accusing anybody of even being involved in this crime, but when it's gone on 46 years unsolved and it was a friend of yours that got brutally murdered and you won't talk to us or you're lying to me, it's going to raise red flags with us. So obviously names will come out at some point. We pass all of this kind of information on to the detective at Lubbock PD so that he can, do what he needs to do about it. But it's just yet another indicator that backs up our feeling that Debbie knew her killer very well and that killer knew her and her property. So because this third person knew all of that. George, did I miss anything?
No, that sounds pretty complete to me. I guess what we'll do is I'll go ahead and go through, there's a couple of questions here. I'll go through those first, and if anybody's got any other questions, they can raise their hands. Sharon just said smart. I guess I was just about the conversation we're having right now. And then LaDonna, I believe she was talking in reference to the shower, is very weird. And then let's see, did Paul's parents confirm that he showered at their house? We don't know.
No, not as far as we can tell.
No, I mean, if they did, there's no record of it.
Yeah.
So that's all we can say. I mean, we don't know that there's not a record, but we know that we have not been privy to one.
Yeah.
So yeah, any questions about these topics we just talked about?
Or really anything. I mean, I told everybody bring any questions you have, and we'll do our best.
First of all, I have a question and a comment. My comment is, Paul saying he wanted to shower at Debbie and Doug's house could be a good reason for him to have an extra change of clothes with him, and nobody would think anything about it. But my other question was, do we know what day their trash day was and when the last time the trash truck went through there?
I don't think we do we, George?
No, we don't. We can put that down for somebody to figure out. That's a good question.
Yeah, I'm writing that down right now.
Yeah.
Because I feel like that would probably have negated whatever was there if it were rolled over it.
Yeah, that could help provide a timeline for when the tire track was ended up in the alley.
Right.
Because you're right, if the trash truck's coming through, it's going to obliterate that track.
Yeah.
Right.
In terms of Paul, he actually told police he had a change of clothes with him in his car when he went to work that night.
Okay.
He did. He did tell them that.
Yeah.
I don't know how to raise my little hand, so.
Oh,
You're fine. Yeah, go ahead.
So you
Go
got
ahead,
my little
Nancy.
hand.
That works.
Just one question, because of the little things you just alluded to, these other 3 or whatever. Is there any possibility it was, well, back then, their age, a girl and a boy? Or a couple?
Are you talking about a couple killing him?
Yes.
Killing her?
You said it wasn't a woman, you don't think, but could there have been
No,
someone?
and one thing that we should also say too about that, and Jennifer and I talked about this today, it's not just the quickness with how she was subdued. It's also the depth of the wounds, because the person had to have a lot of manual dexterity, and these wounds were deep. Like it was a deep plunge, pull out, deep plunge, pull out. And so our thinking is that at some point, a female would probably just go for her face and just start slashing, not deep plunge, pull out, because deeply plunging a knife into someone is very, I hate to use the word term, it's very intimate. Like you can feel their body in the knife. And I feel like a girl would probably just take the knife and just stab her face. A lot of superficial wounds. They might get a few good, like wounds that could have potentially, killed her. But this looks, just from the stab pattern, like Jennifer said, this looks like a male who had a deep emotional attachment to her. And as soon as he had her subdued, he stopped, and then the staging and the posing stage started. Jen, you want to add to that?
Yeah, I tend to agree. I mean, I don't tend to think there was 2 perpetrators, no matter what the gender.
Yeah. And Jen, we've asked that. We've asked a lot of experts and they all told us the same thing. They think it's one person and it's a male.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've tried to walk my brain through that. What would the second person be doing? Because we're pretty sure all injuries were delivered with a single knife, like Jeff explained last week. They're all consistent with one type of knife, not two. So then I'm like, what's the second person doing during this attack? Okay, probably helping pin her down. But then I would expect to see a very different blood stain pattern in that carport if you've got a second person on top of her or holding her arms above her head or something like that. I would expect the bloodstain pattern to be quite different than it was. And I'm not an expert in bloodstain analysis. I have taught the course, but I'm not actually certified in that. So I'm not the smartest person on it, but I just, and then when you have two people involved, like the profilers explained, and we all know you have two people involved. I mean, now you've got the risk of like two people who have to keep their mouth shut 46 years. And a lot of times, I think in the majority of cases where that happens, eventually one cracks. One just, can't take that burden that they're carrying, whether they confess to a friend or family member or whatever. Eventually it comes out, and obviously that's not happened here yet that we know of, but it doesn't mean it didn't happen. But I can't rule out two perpetrators or male, female, but to me, that's not what the crime scene tells us. So.
Yeah, it's kind of like that, like we talked about, solid, lean, and then toss up. We're pretty solid. It's just a single male, but again, it can't be ruled out. I mean, it's possible. Yeah. I mean, trust me, Nancy, Jennifer and I spent many hours asking that question and just going back and forth. Could it have been a couple? Could have been two guys? Could have been two girls? I mean, what we try to do is we try to take what we know, and then we place it up against the probabilities, because that's all we can do at this point, because we don't have access to the complete case file, and we have a lot of it. We don't have all of it. We don't have the ability to test evidence. I mean, that's the main. If we could test evidence, that would be great. I mean, we would have way better answers for everybody, but we don't have that ability. But we're confident that the Lubbock PD is going to do that, and everybody's going to get some answers soon.
Yeah. The question in the chat about the shower. When you guys said, Paul said his mother said there were some wet towels in the bathroom, so she knew she'd taken a shower. Was that back in 1975, or did he say that recently? That was in his original statement. That's how he alibied himself, which isn't actually a thing. You can't legally alibi yourself. But yeah. They allowed him to, it appears. So like we said earlier, if his parents were questioned, that we don't have a record of it. But that was in his original statement. Was a new third person suspect at the lake with Doug and Debbie? We're actually still working to compile a complete list of.
That's a good question.
And we are not confident that we have a complete list of who was at the lake. So that's a difficult question to answer. I'm going to leave it at that.
Did we miss one? I think.
What did I miss?
Do you think that the stabs to the back happened first? Yes, we think that that's very probable. That maybe the stab wounds to the front, even the side, were as the thing was de-escalating, possibly. I mean, Jen, that's pretty much where we're at right now. I mean,
yeah. Oh my gosh, I can't tell you guys how many times I've gone back and forth on that line of thinking, because originally I was like, she was confronted to her front and then somehow got turned on her back, because the injuries to her back don't indicate that she's struggling for the most part. The one to her armpit indicates she's struggling, but then like Jeff explained last week, she might not have been struggling with that one. It may have been that the knife got stuck between her ribs, and the killers got to wedge it or move it around in order to loosen it and retrieve it. So I mean, this will probably be a debate in my mind until, beyond even when this is over with, because this is a difficult one to effectively recreate every single injury and what order they came in. So, but I think me and George are leaning towards the injuries to the back probably were delivered basically in succession and probably towards the beginning of the attack.
Absolutely. Sharon said, given the amount of blood, what could explain the lack of bloody footprints? It seems to me, A, there was a change of shoes, B, the person took off their shoes and cleaned them, or C, the person was barefoot and was able to wash off. Sharon, I'll say this. We've gone through that and we've gone through that list too, because that's the first thing, when the first time we looked at the pictures, I was like, now I'll say this. Now, let's be clear. There could be shoe prints that we can't see closer to where the initial attack started. I want to make sure everybody's clear. We don't have pictures of that. So there could be shoe prints down there, and I'm sure they've got them. But we're talking about what you guys have all seen is this upper part next to the back porch. We literally went to the same list. We're like, okay, and I postulated one time that maybe they were just wearing socks, that they weren't even wearing shoes, because you know how a sock will just kind of get smudgy if you come across some liquid, or like oil, let's say, we'll just say that oil, blood, something like that, it would just smudge. It wouldn't leave like a typical print. So yeah, we have definitely gone through that. And then let's see. And then Deborah says, the shower story is just bugging me. Who drives around with a spare change of clothes to possibly find a place to shower? And if he didn't have a change of clothes, who takes a shower and puts on dirty clothes to go on a date?
I will defend Paul on this. So he initially was supposed to work till 10 o'clock and is supposed to go on a date. He did not know before he got to work whether or not he'd be able to leave work earlier than when his shift was scheduled for. So thinking that, or knowing that there's a possibility I have to work till 10, but I'm supposed to meet her around 10. That's a really short time frame. I am going to throw some extra clothes in my car in case I can't shower. At least I can change out of my dirty pizza uniform, to something more presentable for a date. So I will defend him on that. I think it's actually logical that he had a change of clothes with him in the event that he was not going to get off work early and have time to go home and shower. Hopefully that makes sense. But you make a good point. Because
Yeah,
if it
you
wasn't
do.
for that, I'd be asking the exact same question.
Yeah, and I will throw this in there too. I'll defend and then not defend. One thing back at that time, you had to take things, we didn't have cell phones back then. Things were different. Obviously, everyone here knows that. You had to keep things with you more, like changes of clothes. If you were going to go to the gym, there wasn't, you kept that stuff with you. On the flip side of that is we're talking about a matter of a couple of minutes to go home or a couple of minutes to go to Doug and Debbie's. We're not talking about a 30, 40-minute drive across town where it's really a necessity. We're talking about 5 to 10 minutes tops. So that speaks for itself.
Yeah.
Jen, I'll let you take the next couple.
Have you spoken with the cousin? There's 2 cousins of Debbie's that were looked at, or I guess interviewed. I should say they weren't suspects. I wouldn't call them that, but we've talked to several of Debbie's extended family members, and some have requested to not have their names or their information put out there. And so respecting them on those requests, we're just going to kind of keep that list vague, but just know that, yes, we have followed that path down on her 2 cousins and gotten as much information as we possibly can about them and their whereabouts and everything like that. George, you have anything else you want to add?
No, I mean, we have vetted every person, and I think we've said it before, but we're talking, people of interest are just people who have some connection to the case. They were never vetted as suspects. They were looked at like anybody else for whatever, for a certain reason. There were reasons why everybody was questioned. And we've explored all that, and we're going to keep exploring. We're not done. So,
Right.
But yeah, we've explored it. Don't worry. It's a part of this.
Yeah. And the man, you asked who's the man that insisted on speaking with Debbie. I think you're referring to this story or situation that was reported where one of her cousins knew some guy who I don't think was ever named, George, as far as I know, some guy who wanted to meet with Debbie because he had information about her brother or something like that.
Well, to be clear, Jen, it was a guy that allegedly had been in jail with another relative And somehow this relative had gotten into contact with him, and then the cousin got a hold of Debbie and said, hey, this guy wants to talk to you. And Doug actually remembered some of this.
Mhm.
And then finally, Debbie's like, I don't want to talk to this guy. We don't have a clear story about this. I mean, we know it's in the contemporaneous reports. We know that this happened before they got married too. So this was actually further back in the timeline, but we also know that Doug and Debbie were only together for less than a year from the time they started dating till she died. So, and they were supposed to meet at a place called the Show Place 6, or Show Place 4, which incidentally, my first year of college, I was the assistant manager at the Show Place 6 there. So, which was the Show Place 4 back in those days. So I'm pretty aware of that. But yeah, that's a weird story too. I'm going to tell you right now, there's a couple of weird stories in this case, and that is for sure one of them. But again, we don't have the context of that conversation with their cousin, so we don't know.
Yeah. This is a really good question. How long would it have taken the killer to unwedge the knife from her ribs? Could that account for the time that I discussed about her laying in the carport for a couple minutes? I think that's possible because Jeff explained that he's seen situations where a perpetrator plunged a knife into someone and it got so wedged that it took them literally dragging the body by the knife blade across a room to unwedge that knife. So it is possible that it was that wedged. He's trying to unwedge it, and your adrenaline, and by this time you're huffing and puffing probably as the perpetrator, you're tired and you're frustrated. He could have stepped away for a minute, but knew he couldn't leave that knife there. No way.
Right.
So I think that's actually a really legitimate theory on that.
It is, because they could have left the knife there, and they're in a panic, they're freaking out, and they say, okay, I'm going to go clean myself up. They go in the house, clean up, come back out, and then come up with a new way of trying to pull the knife out, like maybe taking their foot, like trying to brace themselves better so they can get it out. But that's an excellent point.
Well, you know what else, George? If this did happen, that carport's pitch black. They come back out, they can't see her or the knife. And maybe that's what led partly to them dragging her over to the light.
Could be.
That's a scenario I had never thought of. So that
Right.
actually, that question, Allie, leads to a lot of good thoughts.
Yeah, it does.
Okay, so. Yeah, if you work in a restaurant, you smell like grease, yes, indeed, and you would typically have a change of clothes. I agree, especially if you're going to go out with somebody after your shift.
Yeah.
When Doug called Debbie about Paul showering there, was that about the same time that Paul clocked out? I'm a little confused about that. Yes, we don't know the exact time of Doug's phone call. He, in his initial statement, said it was around 9 p.m. But that could be 8:45, that could be 9:15, somewhere in that half-hour range. But yes, the two events occurred within probably a few minutes of each other. Is that fair to say, George?
Yeah, and also I'll add this, Tina, when we talked to her, she did say that he was freshly showered. I think that's pretty well common knowledge. So he did take a shower. That is a fact.
And then Yvonne, my coworker who was a hippie in the 70s, said that showering at each other's houses wasn't all that weird. Yep, I could see that.
That's true. Well,
Yeah.
Hey, Yvonne, I'll say this. It might not have been weird to shower at your friend's house or communal or other friends' houses. It might be a little weird if your ex-boyfriend, after you got married, said, hey, can I come by your house and take a shower? That might be a little too, even for a 70s hippie, that might be too much.
Anybody else have any other questions? And of course, you can always message us later if you think of something. And for those who aren't on with us live, but you'll be able to watch a recording at the end of this, you might end up with questions. So please either, message me and George or put them on the Facebook group so we can all discuss it. Because as you guys have witnessed tonight, you guys actually prompted some new theories and ideas that we'd never thought of. And that's why we love this crowdsourcing platform, because that's what works. Two brains can't come up with everything.
Yeah.
So we appreciate that.
Jen, why don't you go ahead and take the next two topics, and then I've got the end. You don't have what I had written out, so I've got it, the very end part. So
Okay.
just take the next two.
Let's see. Okay, we did want to let you guys know that we've added at least 2 names to the person of interest list who were never considered persons of interest over the years. Unfortunately, we can't name them, but Lubbock PD has that information. So just know that our persons of interest list is not a tiny bubble. And the problem is, of course, like when you find a new person of interest years later that was never investigated, you can't put that information out and alert them to it. So, I mean, the reason that we can talk about Paul and Lex openly is because that's pretty much been out there for all these years. Paul himself has told numerous people, including me and George, directly that he was one of the top suspects. So that came out of his own mouth, not ours. But unfortunately, the other names have to remain confidential until Lubbock PD, decides how they're going to approach it and continue this investigation from their standpoint.
Yeah, and it's I think everybody can understand it's fair to them too, because you don't want it. They may have nothing to do with this.
Yeah, exactly. So, but I guess my point is I want you guys to know that we don't have tunnel vision for the 2 guys that seem most likely, because the last case we worked, those of you who know about it, the guy who seemed most likely is not in handcuffs, and his first cousin is a guy that nobody even knew was in the state at the time of the murder. So we're very we're very good at keeping ourselves in check and not, having what's it called?
Confirmation bias.
Bias, thank you, on one person. So a couple other things that we were tossing around is whether there is actually any significance to the wedding photo proofs being taken. We think those were in Debbie's purse and probably inadvertently stolen when her purse was taken. But we can't rule out the possibility that they were in her hand.
Mhm.
She walked out the door with them, the killer saw them. It, was, not led to, but like sparked something in them or sparked it more. And then kind of hand in hand, because we're talking about things that were stolen from the scene, but we still debate, could the money in her purse have been a motivator for taking that purse? Because she did have $140. Now, I don't know how many people knew that she had that amount of money in her purse.
Mhm.
What does that equal to in today's money, George? 700 or something?
It's like $700-800, somewhere in that range. I don't know, with inflation, it might be a couple $1,000s now. I don't know. I'm talking about inflation recently.
Yeah, I know.
But yeah, it was a lot of money. And also, it's funny, I was working on another story. A lot of you guys might not know this, but I write a lot about politics and business. And so I actually was just doing some research for a business story I was working on. I came across like an economic snapshot for 1975. The unemployment was in double digits. We were in that huge oil crisis. Jobs were hard to find. People were not making any money. The economy was severely depressed. And so you're talking about an amount of money that could have paid somebody's rent for 2 or 3 months. That's a significant amount of money. I've seen people killed for way less. And so I've never said it was the primary motivating factor for the crime, but I think that it's possible that it was an ancillary motivator, that the person who did it knew the money was in there and they took it. And one of the reasons that I think that is because they took the money out of the purse, they didn't take her rings. And the first thing you'd say is, okay, well, maybe the rings were more valuable. Why not take those? Well, the thing of it is that the rings can be a problem because they could lead back to you. You take them to a pawn shop, you tell somebody you've got them, that story starts getting around, they know it. Cash, if I walk out on the street right now and find a $20 bill, I put it in my pocket, no one's going to question where that $20 bill came from or where I got it. If I have a ring in my pocket, that creates a problem. And Jen, you made a great point today about another reason why they might have taken the rings.
Well, her hands were extremely bloody. So they may have just not wanted to get any more blood on their own hands or whatnot by taking those rings. And I mean, a lot of humans would just be grossed out by the amount of blood that are on her hands, but I don't think that's the case in this situation, because we know what the perpetrator did, but with her body afterwards and how long they stayed on scene, and they witnessed her die, I guarantee it. So I don't I don't think the blood was a turnoff to them because of the goriness of it, but it could have just been a turnoff because it's just more mess. And again, like George said, okay, so you take your rings, but yeah, what are you going to do with them? I mean, it's risky to pawn them. Someone finds them, on your person or at your house, they're going to question it. They're bloody, so you got to clean them up. I mean, so I don't know what you guys think about.
Amber just had a great comment where the killer hated what the ring symbolized and didn't.
Oh yeah, yeah, that's true.
I never thought of that. That's a good one.
That's a good point. Yep. Those are the wedding photos, the purse, and the rings were kind of our last topic for this evening before we wrap things up and give you guys a little update on a couple other things we're doing. But does anybody else have any input on the theft of those or non-theft of the rings or anything else that you want to voice your opinion on? No, we wore everybody out. And it's dinner time.
Yeah, good. That's what we want to do. Wear them out.
Yeah.
Jen, go ahead and take the first two, and then I'll take the future. I'll take the future efforts. You take the first two, and I'll take the last one. I wrote some stuff out.
So we have some updates to tell you guys. It's not going to sound positive at first, but I think everything that's in motion right now is actually going to work out to be positive for Debbie in the long run. I think everybody knows we were scheduled to speak at CrimeCon at the end of April. We were originally invited around, I think it was mid-December, to come present on Debbie's case, similar to what we did last year on the Rebecca Gould case. Obviously, we readily agreed because CrimeCon this year's got 5,000 people coming. Our presentation would have had a minimum of 1,500 people in the audience, and that's 1,500 more people that could help us. And a lot of attendees at this conference are forensics experts, retired law enforcement, or they have some other connection to professional investigations. And it's a great networking opportunity and way to try to find more experts to help us. Not getting into the family drama, everybody knows what happened. It's on George's podcast. I think it's episode 12, if you don't know what happened with Debbie's family member. But because of those antics, we were then asked to revamp our entire presentation to not include Debbie. And initially, George and I agreed, but over the weekend and talking with the producer, we decided that's not the best avenue and the best thing to do for Debbie. If we can't even mention her name, which is the case that we've put our heart and soul in, as well as you guys have since last summer. So we have stepped back from that CrimeCon opportunity and decided not to take them up on it. Part of the reason is also because, they've said you guys can still be on Podcast Row if you don't want to do this type of presentation. And we debated that too, but you don't get any reimbursement for your travels if you don't present. And everyone knows Vegas is super expensive. Plane tickets are super expensive right now. I know me and my husband were going to be out at least $2,000 out of pocket, whether we presented or not. And George and I just decided we can put that money towards better things and still give Debbie her voice back, because essentially what happened with that family member is she stole Debbie's voice from this giant platform that we got for her. What we're going to do is, again, reevaluate our expenses and put them towards other things. So some of you know that me and George are members of a nonprofit called the Casebreakers. If you don't know about them, check out their website. It's thecasebreakers.org. I actually sit on their board of directors. We've been in the news over the last few months for our work on the Zodiac case, as well as a couple other high profile ones, although me and George obviously prefer to work a less known case because we can make a bigger difference. But they're a nonprofit, unlike CrimeCon, and there's nothing wrong with CrimeCon at all, but CrimeCon is a for-profit organization. The Casebreakers is not. So the money aspect is immediately removed and there's no focus on them trying to make money. Their top mission and focus is to get answers for victims of unsolved crimes. And that obviously is right in line with what me and George's top focus and mission is in what we do. So they, obviously, since I sit on the board of directors and me and George are volunteer investigators for them, like we have their full backing and support. They have a fairly large platform of their own, and they're going to help us use that to continue to get the word out about Debbie's case. They've got several documentary and other TV projects in the works, and they've pitched our work on Debbie's case to one of those networks. I think, and what I'll do is I'll put their web address in the chat box in just a second, but George is going to talk a little bit about our upcoming future efforts, and there's actually more than what he's going to mention. So I just want to tell everyone, check the Facebook group every day, because you're going to get some new information and updates in the very near future.
Yeah, Jen, we are currently working on plans for the very near future, and we want to bring you some extended coverage of Debbie's case. Obviously, we're staying a little vague right now because, you know, one thing that we learned through this cult fiasco with all the stuff that's going on is that if we're too specific, then we might have an interruption in our effort, and we don't want that anymore. This is strictly about finding the person who killed Deborah Sue. That's all we care about. Don't care about any of those stuff. We don't want credit for it. We don't care about that. That doesn't matter to me at all. I've covered probably 3 dozen capital murder cases in my life. I've covered some of the most famous cases in the world, and I don't care. I just have experience that I think can be valuable in the right situation, and I want to give it. Jennifer's in the same boat. I've got some, obviously, you know, I do a lot of public speaking engagements talking about various things. And so later on this year, I've got several speaking engagements, and I'll be talking. And a lot of the things that we wanted to lay out in our presentation at CrimeCon, those elements will be a part of those presentations. So everybody will get a chance to see a more succinct, you know, because I know that like spreading it across like a platform like this, you know, it's, you know, 8 weeks, and, you know, all the details get mired. Sometimes having that one good hour of just hearing the case and all the facts laid out, bam, 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 is much better for people. So we're going to find a way to present that. I've got a lot of speaking engagements coming up, so we're going to do that. And I want you to know this, we are working on another separate project. We'll reveal the details of that very soon. And I just wanted to say this: a silent silhouette cast a pall over Lubbock, Texas on August 24th, 1975. In this eerie summer faded shadows, a woman's life was brutally taken. As a waning gibbous moon cast its light down upon the West Texas frontier town, her husband found Debbie's lifeless body in the dark. We will be producing a new vehicle for you to get the information and much more in the coming months. And when I say get more information, I'm talking about some of these interviews we've done. We're going to give them to you. You're going to hear and read with your own eyes and own ears. You're going to be able to see all this stuff. We're not going to keep it under wraps forever, because it doesn't do us any good to do that, because keeping this case file under wraps for 46 years has done no good. If you're not a member of our Facebook page, anybody who's here or anybody who hears this later on when it's released, please join our page, because that's where you're going to get these updates. Someone here knows the silhouette of Debbie's killer, and we're going to find him.
George is the creative writer out of the two of us, in case you guys can't tell. I'm like, so I know we ran really long tonight, but I appreciate you guys all sticking around. Actually, it looks like everybody stayed, and we appreciate it. Again, if there's any confusion or whatever on anything that we've discussed tonight, or you have questions, you know, you guys know you can reach out to us anytime. We'll do the absolute best we can to answer all your questions. And again, like, I wish we could give you more specific things that we're doing in the next couple months, but guarantee if we put out those details, there'll be some disruption, like, is the word that I'll use, because that's what George used, and we're done with that. So this is only about one person, and that's Debbie, and she deserves to have her voice, and that's what we're trying to do for her, and, you know, figure out who this monster is that's walked the streets for 46 years and possibly taken other lives too. Hopefully not, but it's possible. Yeah, Nancy, I see your hand. Oh, are you just clapping? Is that the clap thing? So appreciate everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight. We do want to have some more live sessions in the future, but we don't have anything scheduled on the calendar yet. But again, stay tuned, and we just appreciate you guys following along, and helping us. You've been an immense assistance to us.
Thank you very, very much from the bottom of my heart. This is exactly the kind of group we wanted to put together, and this is working out great.
Yeah. Hope you won't hesitate to ask if there's any way we can help. Absolutely. Yes, we will. Yeah. Trust me, if there's specific things that you guys can help with, I mean, we'll make posts about it, you know, like we did with the trying to compile a list of the neighbors, relatives and all that. Like, so many group members did hours of research. I recognize that, and sent us so many names and stuff. So yeah, anything that we can ask for help on, we will. With that, I hope everybody has a great Tuesday night. Hopefully we'll see y'all soon.